They used $5 trillion worth of credit to bail out the European banks, in 08 and 09. And that was a third of everything that they were doing. And they bought a lot of the bad debt here in this country. But right. It's utterly amazing. But it's also going to come to an end. You just can't keep bailing out everybody. Right now, I think it's just that the dollar standard is so well ingrained in the whole world system, and that we still are relatively wealthy compared to others. They're still betting that the dollar is going to hold up, but it won't. The confidence will be lost in the dollar just as well.
I was looking at a story this morning that talked about the derivatives to which we've been referring. Estimates value and estimated the value of the total notional value of worldwide derivatives market anywhere from 600 trillion all the way up to 1.5 quadrillion. The article says, keep in mind that the GDP of the entire planet is 65 trillion. So we're dealing with figures that are impossible for me to even come close to understanding. Bloomberg says it this way: derivatives are financial instruments that are used to hedge risks or for speculation. They are derived from stocks, bonds, and loans, and currencies and commodities, and linked to specific events such as changes in the weather or interest rates. Well, if it's 1.4 quadrillion, that's 40 times the value of the entire world's stock market. That's 10 times the value of every stock and every bond on the planet, and 23 times the world's entire gross domestic product. That's what's out there in all of these funds. And the Bank of America just dumped $53 trillion into insured deposits, hoping that somebody's going to bail them out when the shinola hits the fan.
And rest assured, the world has never faced anything like this. And I think the people in Washington are just oblivious to this, and they're unconcerned. Otherwise, they would want to do something about it and not perpetuate it.
Well, I watched you in the last debate in Nevada. You were doing jumping jacks. You over on the side trying to get people off the stupid conversation like mowing who's mowing your lawn. Hey, over here. Hey, look over here. Economic collapse of the universe, and you guys are talking about who's mowing somebody's yard? What's wrong with you people?
Yeah,
but they weren't watching you.
No, and if they were really concerned in Washington, everybody's sort of expressing concern because the people are concerned. They have to, play to the popular consensus. But if they were worried that they would do something about it, they would actually consider maybe cutting $1. But you couldn't even get $1 cut. I mean, let alone it's a steady increase in spending, steady increases in debt, steady increases in guarantees, and then if you get into trouble, well, the government's supposed to hire everybody, put them on the government payroll, and that's going to solve our problem. But this whole thing on derivatives is nothing more than a bet. It's sort of like you and I having a bet. You're going to bet the stock market's going to be a certain level in 1 year. And if, and you win and I lose, but I don't have any money. I mean, it's just a deal between you and me. You can get angry at me. You might take me to court, but the taxpayer isn't hurt. But this is a consequence of easy money and credit that has, filtered up through the financial system. And it's the moral hazard of government always being there, providing the insurance and the guarantee. That's where the real criminality is, and that's where the great danger is, because now all the banks are so overextended that if this isn't going to be resolved, the banks are going to have to declare bankruptcy, and that's what's going to happen eventually, but it'll be quite different because they think that bankruptcy can come by just with runaway inflation. They think inflation is better than the liquidation of debt through bankruptcy.
Congressman Ron Paul is here in the studio with us. I know this is technical stuff, but your future and my future depends upon how the grown-ups deal with this. And on this subject, Ron Paul has been a two-generation grown-up. You're welcome to join us at 284-1040 or 800-469-4295. Back in a moment. Right back to conversation. Mickelson here with you. It is your turn. Congressman Ron Paul is our in-studio guest. I saw this morning I hate to be so depressing here, Congressman Paul. Usually they call you Dr. Gloom. You are a cheery breath of fresh air compared to me. I can outgloom you any day of the week.
Oh, boy.
gloom at 10 paces. Just said, Business Week just said that GM has sold more than 2 million cars in China for the second straight year. They sell more cars in China than it does in the United States. Now, I'm happy they're selling products, but they are now more beholden to another jurisdiction than us.
Not only that, there are predictions now that the General Motors is government motors, that ironically they may end up in China, literally building the cars in China. Wouldn't that be some unintended consequence of the taxpayers' bailout of this corporation? It's a sad story.
Is there anything that we should or could do about this?
Get the government out of the business of running cars and freeing up the market, then maybe we could become competitive, but that involves tax code changes, regulatory changes, monetary changes, and removing any influence on labor prices, and maybe we would become competitive again.
Well, let's talk to as many people as we can, as quickly as we can. And Bill, you've got a really great question to get us started. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Congressman, I just have to say congratulations on being probably one of the few, if not perhaps the only, sadly, politician these days that says what he means, stands up for it, and is someone that I believe I could trust. So thank you.
Thank you.
The question I have, while I don't agree with some of your positions as far as what you want to do to the federal government, but I'd like to understand more about it, and specifically, how would you approach making the changes to the federal government so you don't throw the country into chaos? Because I think you're right in one perspective that I hate to use the term, but the country needs an enema. And we got to make some radical changes, and perhaps going too far one way would allow us to come back to something that's more civil and more appropriate.
All right, you had a plan, and you just issued a couple of days ago.
And the way I see it, I think the country is in chaos, and if we don't do something, it's going to get much, much worse, just as we were talking about the derivatives and what is the impending problems coming from that. And that's why I say you do have to do something. Do I say it's going to be just so smooth that nobody will even know this the transition? No, it won't be that easy. But I have, introduced a plan where we cut spending, because I think that's where the problem is. We've spent too much, and sovereign debt throughout the world is out of control. Our debt, the debt in all the other countries, and it's all been backed up by the dollar. So you have to take a stand. And this is why, if you're serious, and if the country has to be serious, that if this is the decision, you have to start with, like, cutting $1 trillion out of the budget. And this can be done. This isn't like throwing people out in the streets. For instance, I'd take the military budget down to $500 billion. That would still be way more than anybody else, probably more than all the other countries put together. And I'd bring those troops home and start having them spend their money at home. Now, some people get pretty nervous about that because they think we should be in 150 countries and 900 bases and continuing to get involved in wars like in Libya and wherever. But I think things like that, and getting rid of 5 departments, and going back to the spending level of 2006, the government was way too big in 2006, and people get real nervous about that. But I get real nervous about continuing to do what we're doing because it's unsustainable. You can't run up deficit of $1.4, $1.5 trillion every year and just print money to cover it. So the consequence of not doing anything is much more chaotic than making a sincere effort to cut back.
Thank you for your call, sir. This is Dan. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Jan and Dr. Paul. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm a supporter with my time and with my money. Do some volunteering at the bank in the office, and would encourage other supporters to do the same. Dr. Paul, what is in a nutshell, what would you change about our current situation with our border with Mexico?
This came up in the last debate, too. Much debate came about the 14th Amendment and how do we get control of the immigration, and do you put up a wall?
Yeah.
They didn't ask you that question. What would you have said?
Well, I didn't get a chance, but I would have said about the 14th Amendment that.
Let me just give you some background here. Here's an abridged version of the question that Anderson Cooper served up. Nobody challenged the premise of his question.
14th Amendment allows that anybody born in the United States is an American citizen. Should that change?
I want to go back and answer this question first, okay? And that is...
Prepare. The 14th Amendment allows anybody, a child of illegal immigrants who's born here, is automatically an American citizen. Should that change?
Well, let me address Herman's issue that
Actually, I'd rather you ask the question, answer that question.
I understand that. You get to ask the questions.
So anyway, nobody wanted to answer the question. I was itching to hear what Ron Paul was going to say about the 14th Amendment. Does that grant automatic citizenship? Because we've had this conversation before.
I do not believe that is the case. I don't think it was intended that way. That's the way it's been interpreted in later years. But there's really no country in the world that says that if you just happen to be in that country and a woman's pregnant and she happens to deliver, if you're in Japan, you happen to deliver in Japan, who would expect you to be a Japanese citizen? I mean, even if you're in Canada, you're not a Canadian citizen. So that was never intended that, and it says under the jurisdiction. I think it does mean that if you're a permanent resident and under the jurisdiction and you're legal and born here, I mean, sometimes a permanent resident might be here for 20 years and they have children there. I would think that's under the jurisdiction. But because you step across the border for the sole purpose of having a baby here to become a citizen and go on our welfare rolls, I do not interpret it that way. I think it should be clarified, and it could be clarified by law, and you don't have to amend the Constitution.
That's what Michelle Bachmann has said. We don't have to change the Constitution to do this. All we have to do is just you in Congress say nothing in this Constitution should be interpreted to grant automatic citizenship to children of foreign-born who are especially of non-resident or illegal status.
Right.
Right after our farm markets, we'll reconvene the conversation. Congressman Ron Paul is here. 284-1040 or 800-469-4295 is where you can find us if you'd like to be part of the conversation. Well, there's going to be a town hall meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and Ron Paul is going to be speaking. If you've never had an opportunity to hear him speak or ask questions,